Oh boy, here we go. Hey, what is up ladies and gentlemen, I'm Mega Man here once again from the likes of the Maxi Toys videos. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of the Mega Man Marathon. Now you remember yesterday that recently that Blossom has recently finished up with Mega Man 8 for the PlayStation 1/Sega Saturn. So even though she did have a very good time overall, but she still thinks how the fact that Mega Man 8 still feels a bit too lackluster in comparison. But it still looks pretty okay enough as it is. But even then though, speaking of which, is the fact that today that we're down for 8 games and only 3 more games to go until when August is almost finished at this point. So today, speaking of which, we are going to be tackling through possibly one of the most difficult Mega Man games, probably the more difficult classic Mega Man games in the entire classic series period. And that will have to be Mega Man and Bass for the Super Nintendo/Super Famicom in Japan and Game Boy Advance. So yeah, it looks like it's now time for Buttercup to able to do tackle for that game. Even then though, they're hoping she were able to actually just to tackle for that game, unless she able to actually just to constantly die most of the time in that game, because let me tell you right off the bat though, I think she might actually be not looking forward until whenever she tackles for that game, because I've accidentally decided to let her do that game, because I know she's tough all in all, because even then though she is the toughest of one of those Powerpuff Girls, don't get me wrong, but apart from that though, she might as well actually accept this challenge. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into one of the most difficult classic Mega Man games ever, Mega Man and Bass for the Super Nintendo/Game Boy Advance. Good luck with that, Buttercup. Hey, what is up ladies and gentlemen, I am Buttercup here from the likes of the Maxi Toys videos, and I am the toughest one of them all from the likes of the Powerpuff Girls out of all these 3 sisters of mine. Well, 2 of them to be more precise, Bubbles and Blossom. So today ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be tackling through the next game of the forms of the Mega Man series at this point for the Mega Man Marathon. I'm about to be tackling through Mega Man and Bass. Released in 1998, originally for the Super Nintendo/Super Famicom, but it's Japan-only game, from the actual Super Nintendo version. However though, the English version would, well, you know, for the American and European versions, that the game later released on the forms of the Game Boy Advance for in 2002 or 2003. So that way, the Americans and the European versions can now finally experience with Mega Man and Bass itself. So, as the name of the actual game applies, is that you can either select up to 2 different playable characters. You can either play as Mega Man, who rocks the same way as how it does it for quite a while now, and even a new character introduced in the forms of the playable character debut-wise, and that's the forms of Bass. So, actually, I'm gonna do things a little bit more differently than the likes of any other Mega Man game Let's Plays. Is the fact that normally we did manage to able to play as Mega Man the entire time for the forms of the previous 8 games in the series. Well, I might decide to able to do things quite differently, because I'm actually able to get started with Bass's playthrough first, whilst we're able to actually select Mega Man after the Bass playthrough. So let's get started right here. So from the get-go though, much like how it does in Mega Man 7 and especially noticeable in Mega Man 8, we're actually going to begin with an intro stage. So yeah, Bass's ability, as far as Bass's gameplay goes, he plays very differently than the likes of Mega Man. Because first of all, that he can't charge his charge shot, or he can't slide with it. On the other hand though, he does have his very unique abilities, like the forms of He can follow a multitude of directions from top and especially side by side, and even diagonal shots too, which is very improvement over the likes of how it does it for Mega Man. And also in addition to that though, he did manage to able to perform a double jump. So even then though, if you want to make the platforming segments a lot easier, then you would able to actually experience how the fact that bass is definitely the easiest mode of the game. Although there's one little downside though, is the fact that his Mega Buster damage wasn't exactly that ridiculously high compared to how it does it in the Mega Man's Mega Buster, but even then though, that could be saying that much. So of course, if you clearly couldn't tell by the forms of the actual quality of this this particular Let's Play of Mega Man and Bass, I'm going to be playing this on the Nintendo Wii U Virtual Console version just because, well, unlike in any other classic Mega Man games, they usually manage to include those in certain Legacy Collection compilations. This game is not included in any other Mega Man compilations at all, unless if you actually manage to able to realize, because this game is, I'm gonna say this right about now, this is by far the most hardest classic Mega Man games you ever going to be consist of, especially if you ever play this on the Game Boy Advance version. Because the thing is with this Super Famicom / the Super Nintendo version, you know how the fact that you can actually see what's going on screen, like it's all full screen. The Game Boy Advance doesn't have that tradition because we have to deal with the screen crunch. See, Fernando, that if you want able to see what's coming up ahead, well, good luck with that, because even though sometimes this game can be downright luck-based at times, in my opinion, especially noticeable how the fact that most of these enemies can come out of nowhere and sometimes, which even though that can get pretty much a misery, especially noticeable when we get to the later levels of the game. So even though we'll get some more details onto that as soon as we're able to actually just get on with things. So, but again, this game did first came out in 1998 and only in Japan for the Super Famicom, unless if you're ever trying to able to experience the English version of the game, if you want to able to get the, well, the Super Nintendo version of the UK version of Mega Man and Bass. I'm pretty sure that the eBay might be able to have that, but it might be a little bit pricey because I just don't know what it is. So anyways, as you can tell from the actual presentation of the forms of Mega Man and Bass for the Super Nintendo / Game Boy Advance, every single graphics in this game, or in this case in every single sprite, heavily, was heavily borrowed from the forms of Mega Man 8, because, you know, the sprites and everything. Proto Man. How come easy in here? You have gone too far, King. I won't allow you to violate this robot museum. Why is this place still there? Since Mega Man 7, I've downloaded all the data of the battle robots. Now I can create an invisible robot army. Since you are a robot, you are qualified to join us if you want. Huh? Another bug to squish? I'm sure my robots will entertain you. Wait, King! Silence! Oh my lord! That's a bit of coincidence, that is. But I'm pretty sure Bass doesn't even care about it. Is that the robot who calls himself King? What a joke. Everyone knows that I am the mightiest robot in the world. I'll show him who deserves to be called King. And as soon as we're done with that scene, then we actually come towards him. I appreciate your ignorance, but I have no time for you. I'll allow the Green Devil to handle you. So yeah, the first boss in this game is none other than the Green Devil himself, ever since in Mega Man 8. So, that's a little bit of a controversial choice, doesn't it? But let that side of things to come though. So all you have to do is basically, we need to able to keep on, shooting its eye, and then that's all you have to do. While at the same time, you need to able to actually destroy those little green goopy parts at the same time. So that way, as soon as you deal enough damage on the Green Devil, then you would able to accomplish that level in no time. Although, the game itself is going to be ridiculously harder than any other Mega Man game at this point. At least ever since you're doing the likes of the difficult, difficulty in the forms of Mega Man 2. So from the get-go, from Mega Man and Base, we can actually select up to 3 Robot Masters, which is quite different than the likes of how he does it in, obviously in Mega Man's games 1 through 6, that we normally have 8 Robot Masters, and in the likes of Mega Man 7 and 8, that we start things off with 4 Robot Masters, but in Mega Man and Base, this time around though, we start things off with 3 Robot Masters, which I don't know why, but I'm guessing because they actually did manage to bring us into the forms of the connection to these branching, pathways to go to, but the forms of dealing with Robot Masters in general. So, here we go into the first Robot Master we're going to have to deal with right there, and possibly this is the only option when we're able to actually proceed to the game, but in forms of Cold Man. So, as you expected, much like in Iceman stage, and especially noticeable with the forms of Blizzard Man from Mega Man 6, and especially noticeable with, Freeze Man from Mega Man 7, and especially noticeable in the forms of Frost Man from Mega Man 8, well, this is basically just a snowy themed level, so even then, there's not much else I can really say, it's just a snowy environment level. In fact, most of these enemies in this game are heavily borrowed from the forms of Mega Man 8 because of, I've already mentioned about this before, that the sprites are heavily borrowed from Mega Man 8, and also these sprites as well, so even then know that because you see right there, that we actually did come across into the forms of those, ice skating enemies there, and, yeah, the similarities are edible. So, what makes this game incredibly difficult than any other Mega Man games we've ever going to be consist of? Well, before we get to this, however, though, we actually did manage to collect those little CDs. It's nothing plot heavily important to able to actually buy, just to get those, but they are interesting to read through, because if you manage to collect those CDs, you can actually read some of these fun facts about the fact with the forms of the actual descriptions of the previous Robot Masters from the forms of the previous games in the series, like, games 1 through 8. So, I think that pretty much does it for here, so I'm guessing it might actually do the same thing for Mega Man and Base Robot Masters, but hey, at least as far as that's been concerned with this though. So anyways though, here we have this mini boss fight in the forms of Cold Man stage. We need to deal with the forms of that particular snowman robot, and then every once in a while, then we can able to actually move along. So, again, what makes this game incredibly difficult than any other Mega Man games we've ever played so far, not only because the level design itself can downright be broken at times, and plus there's going to be too much enemies keep getting in your way sometimes. In fact, you might easily going to die a lot, like right here. But even then, that's only because of how the fact that while the checkpoint usually retains it all by itself, but it forms of when you're able to actually play this game on the Game Boy Advance version, that if you see the actual text saying now saving, this means you get to the checkpoint. However though, you're probably going to be able to actually get yourselves a little bit of a chance of luck here, because sometimes this version of the game can be downright luck based at times, even especially noticeable when you're trying to trying to dodge through every single projectile as much as you wanted to. And plus also not to mention that, well, depends on what characters you'll be picking, but it forms of how the fact that there might be a little bit of a best strategy for either the actual platforming stages in general or the Robot Masters themselves. So, if that's the case, Base is definitely the better pick when it comes to platforming skills, but when it comes to Mega Man, that he might have a hard time trying to deal with the actual game itself, because to be honest with you guys, Mega Man is not suitable well, but it does not suit well in the forms of this game. I'm going to tell you that right about now. But even now that I might as well able to do 2 playthroughs of the game, just wanted to let you guys know what I'm talking about. So here we go with the first Robot Master in Mega Man and Base. We have his Cold Man, and his pattern is very simple, especially noticeable if you want to able to use Base to actually just to work on with. Especially noticeable how the fact that, well, the annoying part about the forms of trying to deal with Robot Masters as Base is the fact that the damage output took way too long to able to actually deal with the insane amount of damage in the forms of some of these Robot Masters themselves, even especially noticeable compared to Mega Man himself. So, because, Mega Man rocks the same ways of how it does it in the previous 8 games in the series. So, as far as I might as well call this game, I think I'm actually gonna call this game Mega Man 8.5 because, you know, sprites are heavily borrowed from Mega Man 8, and except the fact that it's not on the PlayStation or anything like that, so it's on the Game Boy Advance, or in this case, the Super Nintendo title. So, from the presentation-wise, this game sounds great, so it considers me impressed. So even then, just like how it does in the forms of how it does it in Mega Man 8, like the graphics and sound are everything, but even then, now that could be some more likely than ever. So yeah, for Colt Man, this is what many people seem to go after Colt Man first, because I noticed from the fact that this game is ball-bustingly difficult compared to any other Mega Man games that we've ever played so far, in the classic industries anyway though. It's most likely because of, if you manage to able to pick 3 different Robot Masters from either the other 3 Robot Masters you're going to be selecting, these guys can either hit hard or pain in the bum to dodge, or have the most annoying luck-based patterns, or in this case strategies. And even then though, to combine with this particular issue, this game once again, much like in Mega Man 8, there is no energy tanks. I mean, why the energy tanks are still absent? Well, until we get to Mega Man 9 and 10, things will able to actually solve this issue out. So I just don't understand why they actually did manage to kick out the likes of the most useful items in the forms of the actual entirety of the classic Mega Man games, and then they somehow managed to took it out in the forms of Mega Man 8, and then especially noticeable with the forms of this game in particular, which it makes no sense, it's ridiculous. So anyways, once you deal with enough bullet hits on the forms of, or the actual Mega Buster at him, or in this case in Colt Man's anyway, then we pretty much guarantee we can able to actually get ourselves our first weapon. So yeah, just like how it does it from any other Mega Man game, then we get ourselves our weapons to our disposal. Or in this base's case, that he just somehow managed to get covered himself into flames, which that's a little bit odd admittedly, but hey, at least we managed to get ourselves our first weapon in Mega Man and base. We have Ice Wall, which allows you to able to actually use the Ice Wall as a projectile of all things, and you can able to use that to able to shove the actual ice wall all the way towards the enemies. So that can be very useful though, especially noticeable with the forms of the next Robot Master we're going to be doing with right here, and that we're going to be hitting to on the top portion of this particular map and tackle through this particular Robot Master at the very top of this screen, which we're actually presented with Burner Man, which almost kind of reminds me of the forms of Fireman from Mega Man 1, and Flame Man from the forms of Mega Man 6, and Heat Man from, you know, Mega Man 2. And especially noticeable with the forms of Turbo Man from Mega Man 7, despite the fact that the actual flame sword weapon, or in this case Sword Man if you will, but I don't know if that actually represents that. So here we go on to Burner Man stage. So even then though, that this level can get outright atrocious at times, even especially noticeable whenever when these platforms are usually there for occasion. Sometimes the actual enemies really trying to screw you up, especially noticeable with the actual level design itself, which it's more likely I might as well able to also call this Mega Man Kaizo game, just because of there's too much enemy placements on screen and stuff like that, especially with the fact that there's going to be too much spikes all over the place, too many bottomless pits, and especially noticeable for the most part, trial and error. So that can get pretty, you know, disorientating at times. So here's something is worth mentioning though, is the fact that we have the returning bolts that you can collect ever since in Mega Man 7 and 8. But it functions the same way as how it does it in Mega Man 7. Because thankfully though, that you can actually collect as many of those bolts as you can get this time around though, unlike in just 40 in Mega Man 8, just because of the limitations of the forms of just something else. So yeah, you get the drill, because even then though, you can actually manage to able to, like, I would say carry up to 999 bolts you can collect, but I guess that makes it a little bit obvious right there, because even then though, that again, unlike in Mega Man 8, you can only collect up to like 40 of them and stuff like that for that nature. So now, Another noticeable difference is, compared to any other Mega Man games, most notably for Mega Man 7, and especially notable for Mega Man 8, well, to be more accurately, Mega Man 8 most likely. Differently than the likes of Mega Man 8 though, is the fact that every time you die in the actual main level itself, even when you're trying to conquer everything in the forms of the actual boss fights themselves, most notably the Robot Masters, if you accidentally die on that particular Robot Master battle, for whatever reason, they decide to can't be bothered able to refuel our weapon energy, because unlike how it does in Mega Man 8, that every time you die on that particular game, your weapon energy will gets refueled, including your health as well. But in here, that it's only just health instead of just the energy weapon, because even then, it functions the same way for how it does in the old school Mega Man games nowadays, especially noticeable how the fact that, well, this is more accurately a much more harder Mega Man games that we might actually consider playing. So, because of that though, I'm pretty much not okay with that, because even then, I can definitely see why that a lot of people seem to get a tad bit more frustrated with the entirety of the game, because especially noticeable if you ever play this on the Game Boy Advance version, because obviously the Game Boy Advance version has a pretty obvious screen crunch, which, to be honest, I'm not a big fan of that either, just because of how the fact that you can't really see what's up on top of the actual screen, or even especially noticeable, you can't see what's up ahead. So, even then though, in this particular point right there, that you really can't get your depth perception going, because even then though, the best way you can able to actually bypass this dangerous flames section, well, you need to get out of there quickly, because obviously if you manage to get touched by the actual flame, you instantly die, so you have to watch out for that. And speaking of which, is the fact that how it, I noticed that the redeemable size of the forms of the actual fire effects in the Game Boy Advance version is a bit more tad bigger than the likes of how it does in the original Super Nintendo version or the Super Famicom version. But I don't know if it's just me, but I'm guessing this might actually be a little bit more severely conductive anyway. So anyways though, let's move on to the next Robot Master in the forms of Mega Man and Bass we have is Burner Man. And right off the bat though, I'm also able to take my death here, because I'm probably not going to handle him with a little bit of health left. So, trust me when I say this, that I'm seriously going to take a lot of deaths in this game, just because of how the fact that this game is really unfair in comparison to how it does it in any other Mega Man game. Especially noticeable with the forms of the enemy behavior, Robot Master's behavior, and pretty much everything else in this majority of the game is such a troll compared to how it does it in the previous Mega Man games in the series, including for the likes of Mega Man 9 and Mega Man 10, and even especially noticeable for the upcoming Mega Man 11. So, yeah, that's a pretty underwhelming experiences altogether for me though, and I can definitely see why that a lot of people seem to get and really have a hard time playing this game, because, well, it's just way too freaking hard to be able to actually play for this. So, there we go folks, now we actually did manage to deal with the forms of Burner Man, and his weakness is the forms of the ice wall, because if you manage to use the ice wall right in front of him, and if you manage to able to shove it towards him, then it'll actually just manage to immediately take him into the forms of spikes below, so that way it'll do certain damage. So, yeah, that's what I can really think about for Burner Man. And speaking of which, we got ourselves his weapon, and that's the forms of Wave Burner, which can be very helpful in some scenarios, most notably in the next upcoming levels coming up ahead. And yeah, that's what I can really say about this here. So, of course, much like how it does it in Mega Man 8, that the save system makes a return, so there's no need for password system, which I'm thankfully grateful about this. Okay, quick edit right there, sorry about that folks, I need to get myself my drink here, and hopefully everything else will be checked out there for the most part. So, the next stage we're going to be heading to is the forms of this kind of a peculiar Robot Master, and that's the forms of Pirate Man, shiver me timbers. I'm just only kidding, because even I know that, although surely that's what mostly the pirates always attempt to say that line, every time whenever they, like, you know, become one of them. Obviously, it's a water level, so as you expected for any other Mega Man game, there's going to be a lot of water to deal with right here. So, however though, the biggest difference is here is the fact that, unlike in Mega Man 8, that, normally in Mega Man 8 you can actually swim in this particular level, but on the other hand though, that does not apply to this game this time around, because it, matches the same way to how it does in the forms of any other Mega Man game in the past. So, yeah, as far as the later levels goes for the forms of Mega Man and Bass, don't expect me able to die a lot. I mean a lot. Like every single time I'm always gonna get myself my first deaths in any other levels coming up through it, because I definitely understand why a lot of people seem to get really frustrated with this game. Well, the only exception being the forms of the intro stage, so even then note that, because considering how it makes it a little bit more, well, easier aside from able to actually just trying to get used to how the game mechanics are, especially noticeable if you have a first time playing the game, then you might as well recommend playing as Bass for the first time rather than just Mega Man, because let me tell you, Mega Man can have a hard time trying to deal with a platforming department, whilst Bass is going to have a hard time trying to deal with the Robot Masters themselves, because, the Mega Buster doesn't deal that much damage in comparison to the likes of Mega Man's Mega Buster, or pretty much for the actual parts itself for that, really. So, anyways. And also that, yeah, one thing is kind of cool though with Bass himself, that's one thing I forgot to mention, is the fact that not only does he able to actually just perform a double jump, especially whenever his, aiming accuracy is gone all over the place, he can also manage to able to perform himself his dash ability, very similar to the likes of how he does it in Mega Man X games, which by performing is by simply we need to, are you kidding me? Yep, this is what I was going to be saying right there, because I'm simply going to have to die time and time again with any other levels coming up for it. So, yeah, that's what makes this game such a troll from a lot of people, just because of how the fact that, well, it's a tad bit hard and a tad bit more difficult at the same time. So, anyways, by performing the actual dashing ability with the forms of only Bass only is by simply we need to, tap the directional pad right or left, depends on what directions you'll be moving. Like, you have to tap it twice until you're able to perform a dash ability. So even though it becomes a very handy though. If you want to do a speedrun tactics like that, well, although truth be told, there's going to be plenty of spikes all over the place in this game, just like how it does it from before. So you might as well able to just classify for watch out for that. So yeah, because this game is a lot harder than any other Mega Man game at this point. So even then note that because of how the fact the matter is though, is that there's no difficulty select. So, because of that though, I think the reason why this game only exists in any forms of the releasing this game on Japanese only version, any forms of the Super Nintendo version, or the Super Famicom version if you will, just because of how the fact that well, obviously it's more accurately a hardest games in existence, just like how it does in Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, so I think that makes it very obvious there. So here we go, it's the forms of the next Robot Master here. This is the forms of Pirate Man, and his weak 2 is the forms of the, well, a flame burner, in case if you probably couldn't tell for that particular point. Now, obviously we cannot use the flame in underwater, because obviously video game logic is usually just never makes an existence. But on the other hand though, we can simply just deal an insane amount of damage on Pirate Man, and that's how you deals the job done. So yeah, that pretty much does it for Pirate Man stage. Even though I've only died just once due to the actual, I'm presuming the damage outputs with every single enemies are way too high in my opinion, just because of how the fact that, well, I just don't know how to really explain about this, to be honest. But anyways. So anyways, let's see what this new weapon that we've got for ourselves. We got the Remote Mine. And this could be very helpful, although I will admit though right away though, this might be the most difficult ability to use in my opinion, just because, well, at least if you get yourselves your aiming accuracy going, then you would be making that ability quite fine as it is. But on the other hand though, I think it might be a little bit difficult to handle through. And before we finish this off though, on the other hand though, we'll go in here for a second there, because if you want to get into the forms of the new friend town called King, that in order to actually get access to the forms of the King's Castle or whatnot, or in this case King's Fortress, you must be sure we need to able to actually get to this level in particular and then actually access to every single Robot Master weapons, and then that way you should able to actually just to get rid of those different colored blocks, and every time you kill those or destroy those particular giant blocks, you get something very rewarding every time you destroy one of those. You actually get yourselves a massive big bolt that you can get, which if you manage to able to obtain a big bolt, this way it will actually worth you, and I'm not even kidding about this, it actually worths you 100. So that's going to be quite a lot of worth of bolts that you can get for this particular point of the game, especially noticeable if you want to able to actually get yourselves your upgrades to begin with. Be sure to recommend doing that, just because of how the fact that, well, if you're having a hard time with the game so far, then you probably guarantee you might also able to actually just to lose a lot of those lives, no matter what though. So, anyways, just like in the forms of how it does in Mega Man 7, and especially noticeable for Mega Man 8, there's also the shopping mechanic, which just like before, it allows you to able to actually just buy some other upgrades and stuff like that. So even then though, that again, in order to actually just buy any items if you want to get yourselves for your disposal, holy Christ, you're gonna have to get a lot of grinding by the forms of those little bolts you can collect. Thought the likes of the original Mega Man were difficult, then you so have not played Mega Man and Base. Because I'm telling you right about now, because it's gonna be a lot tougher in these parts. So, anyways though, I might as well buy my Trouble Boost, because even then, I might as well able to show that off until we get to the later portion of the game. So even then, I might as well able to buy the Super Recovery, because even then, most of those abilities are very much similar to how it does in Mega Man 8. So even then, that similarities are inevitable. So, and obviously the main host this time around though with the shopping mechanic is the forms of Otto, very similar to Mega Man 7, but even then that's as far as I can usually say about this for the most part. So, yeah, for that being said folks, I'm gonna have to end things off at this point right there. I know this video is kind of short though, but don't worry, when we get to the later levels throughout the game, that I'm sure we're able to get those Robot Masters down no matter what. So, yeah, join me next time on the Let's Play of Mega Man and Base for the Super Nintendo / Game Boy Advance. It's the fact that we're going to be taking on the next Robot Master in the lineup, and that we have to be doing with Groundman. So, yeah, see you guys next time. Later, fellas.